Hello, today we will be learning about Surrealism, and what Surrealism is, in a nutshell, is it's basically an art movement which was concerned with the expression of the subconscious mind. Today we're going to find a little bit more about the beginnings of Surrealism.
Like where it came from, what movements it arose from, and the artists, the major artists in the movement, and
also the impact and influence that Surrealism has on today's society. So we hope you enjoy our presentation. We may be goofy at times, just as a warning, but we hope that after you watch this video, you'll be well informed about Surrealism, and maybe you'll be even more interested in the movement. So yeah, with that, we hope you enjoy our video.
Okay, so Surrealism took place in the late 1910s and early 1920s and ended around the 1950s.
So basically it started, it finds its roots in a post-World War I era. Right?
Yeah, the reason why it took place in that time was because World War I was going on, and Dada came out of World War I because they were
angry about everything that was happening with World War I and how they were treating people.
Basically, Dadaism was a movement that sprung from the protest against the violence of World War I, and it was a way for artists to do the opposite of what everyone else wanted to do, because they wanted to separate themselves from the world that they were disgusted with, but basically because they didn't like World War I.
And but Surrealism was not as carefree and cynical as the Dada movement, but it definitely did ignore logic.
So Surrealist members saw that rationalism brought destruction upon European culture and politics, and Surrealism was basically a movement in reaction to that.
And some of the key players in Surrealism was Sigmund Freud, Karl Marx, and Andre Breton, not because they participated in the movement, but many Surrealists valued their ideas. Like Sigmund Freud, the Surrealists were very into his psychoanalytic ideas, and that made their way into their art. And they believed in communism and Marxist theories. And Andre Breton kind of initiated the movement in some way, because he wrote the Manifesto of Surrealism, and he basically defined what Surrealism was, and that was kind of making it known to the world that Surrealism is starting to arise.
Surrealism originated as a literary movement. They experimented with automatic writing, which sought to release the unbridled imagination of the subconscious, but eventually it's made its way into the visual arts.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the techniques of the artists later, but automatism was a big thing in Surrealism because it eliminated them thinking about what they were putting down on a canvas. They put it...
Well, it allowed them to basically tap into their unconscious mind, and it was a way for them to express what they had inside, what their subconscious was, by just basically randomly
putting stuff on their art. Yeah.
The first exhibition of Surrealist art was held in 1925, but in Europe the ideas of Surrealism were rejected initially. Andre Breton set up an international exhibition of Surrealism in New York, and there in New York then became the center of Surrealism and took the place of Paris. And soon after, Surrealism ideas were given new life and became an influence over young artists, especially in the United States and in Mexico. And these Surrealist ideas were bold and new to the art world.
Okay, so now we're gonna go into the techniques and the methods that Surrealist artists use, and it'll kind of help you guys differentiate Surrealist art from other art movements. And we'll talk about the subjects that they like to paint and the different processes that they used for their art. So Surrealism was kind of split into two major groups. The veristic Surrealists, who painted dreamlike images in a literal way, and then there were also artists that were considered calligraphic Surrealists, who designed art through automatic writing, and we talked about automatism earlier. And Juan Miró, which we'll talk about later, he was considered a calligraphic artist, and René Magritte and Salvador Dali were veristic Surrealists.
So most Surrealists like to paint pictures of common objects, but in weird positions and perspectives. And some artists in the movement did abstraction, and others used symbolism.
Some of the subject matters that Surrealist artists try to depict in their paintings were mostly mysterious, mythological, and unorthodox, and they included images of sexuality, decay, and violence in many of their works. So, Surrealism had a lot of recurrent themes of violence and annihilation throughout many of their works. And this really shocked viewers, especially shocked viewers with depictions of mutilated, dismembered, or distorted bodies.
They also used random combinations of found objects that they combined in their surrealist assemblages that revealed the fraught sexual and psychological forces that they believed were hidden just beneath the surface of reality.
Some artists also depicted morphing objects like animal heads morphing into human bodies, and you'll see that in almost every surrealist artist that we will go over today. So we talked about Andre Breton and how he kind of made surrealism known to the world. But Breton, a writer himself, he used automatic writing, which was kind of a way to release the subconscious. He immediately wrote thoughts that popped into his head, so it didn't really make sense. And a way of experimenting with automatism is this technique that surrealists use called the exquisite corpse. And it was an exercise to let one's thoughts free, just like automatic writing was, but it was a source of drawing.
And the Surrealists had like a lot of different techniques that they would use, and one of them is called decalcomania, which was pressing a sheet of paper onto a painted surface and then peeling it off again to make a certain texture and look to it.
Oh, so another technique that the Surrealists used was called frottage. Is that right, Sydney?
Frottage.
So it's frottage. So basically, what you want to do is you want to scrape pigment across the canvas, and make sure that it's laid on a textured surface. You want to heat it up to about 500 degrees. You want to add your paprika to it, and you want to pop that baby out about 4 or 5 hours. It should be good to go. So this has been Paula Dean's buttered chicken recipe. Okay, but all jokes aside, there was a big emphasis on going against the socially acceptable values of art.
That's why they used all these weird unorthodox methods like frottage and decalcomania. So after we've gone over the techniques of Surrealists, we're going to go over historical events that was happening around Surrealism, and also other artists that we're not going to stress too much, but we're going to mention other artists that were in the Surrealist movement but not as active as like Salvador Dali or Max Ernst, which we're going to talk about later, but and also how Surrealism gained its popularity.
Okay, so Surrealism gained its fame through a series of exhibitions in and out of many countries around the world. The first Surrealist exhibition took place at the Galerie Pierre in Paris in 1925.
And there were also galleries at the Museum of Modern Art in New York that sparked more popularity for Surrealists, and it was around 1936 and 1937.
Another Surrealist was Yves Tanguy.
Yves Tanguy was a tan guy.
Oh my god.
He joined the Surrealist movement in 1925, and he later began painting psychoanalytic landscapes.
And so we did talk about how the movement started out as a group of poets, but the first visual surrealist artists were Max Ernst, Andre Masson, Juan Miro, and Man Ray. And two of those artists we're going to talk about in a couple of seconds.
Okay, so some of the major painters in the Surrealist movement were painters like Jean Arp, Max Ernst, Andre Masson, Rene Magritte, Yves Tanguy, Salvador Dali, Pierre Roy, Paul Duval, and Juan Miro.
Complicated names. And then, so Man Ray, he wasn't a painter, but he was a photographer, and he was considered a surrealist, and he was also a Dadaist photographer. His techniques were cameraless images, and one of his famous works was Les Violins d'Indris, which is in French, I can't really pronounce it. And it was this woman, and it was the back of her body, and she's sitting down, and there's two F-holes from a violin painted on her back to make her look like sort of a violin, capturing the figure of the woman.
And then Marcel Duchamp, which we all know because we talked about him in class. He was a surrealist and Dadaist sculptor and painter who invented ready-mades, which we all know, like fountain and then bicycle and stuff like that.
So that kind of goes with like the unorthodox ideas that were invented by the Dadaists and Surrealists. Yeah.
So now we're gonna get into Max Ernst. And so Max Ernst, he was a painter, a sculptor, and a printmaker from Germany. And he had an interest in dreamlike imagery and illogical subjects. He didn't paint what he dreamt, like most artists in the Surrealist movement. He painted his weird perception of the world, and so, but he gets his influence from being in World War I, and all of the experiences that happened to him during the war, all of the nightmares that happened to him, kind of shaped the kind of works and style and subjects that he painted about.
So Max Ernst, he served in the German army for 4 years in World War I, so it made him see the world in different ways because of all the stuff that he saw going on, because it was, pretty messed up stuff. Pretty rough.
Yep. Terrible.
He also studied at the University of Bonn?
I don't know.
Focusing on philosophy, psychology, psychiatry, literature, and art history, which made him like a better artist and everything going on, and it made him know about psychology, which is a big influence towards the Surrealist movement.
Wait, so he went to school?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I researched and it said that he didn't go to school. He was self-taught.
Are we still recording this? Can we not? He was self-taught, but he's self-taught in the way of teaching himself how to do art.
Oh.
But he did go to school for those other things.
You right, Cindy, you right. Okay, so Max Ernst, he became increasingly preoccupied with painting. Like Sydney said, he went to school at the University of Bonn, but for the most part, he was self-taught in his paintings, influenced by Van Gogh and Mack. He developed the technique of frottage, like we talked about a bit earlier, and that was basically laying paper on the floor and rubbing over it with pencil to create the textural effect of wood.
Max Ernst used frottage as a way to eliminate the conscious control of the artist, which we have mentioned before.
And frottage also provided him with a means of evoking hallucinatory visions.
He also had a method of... he started using collages.
He demonstrated dreamlike scenarios in his works before the official establishment of the Surrealism movement. and he cut out details from other sources to create a collage effect, which introduced a new visual effect to Surrealism.
Yeah, he's really famous for his collages, and he has a book of collages that he has done.
Ernst reworked mundane materials, such as manuals on botany, to create stunning images.
He had an alter ego, which was called the Lop Lop, which is kind of like a bird man, because when he was a child, he was confused about birds and humans and death and all that.
It's pretty weird stuff.
And the Lop Lop is incorporated into a lot of his paintings.
Yeah, you'll see it in really weird, distorted images.
Ernst became one of the Surrealist movement's founding members after fleeing to Paris in 1922 after the First World War.
He escaped from the war, fascism, and
the internment camps.
And the internment camps in France, and fled to the U.S. in 1941. It was in New York City where he, along with other European surrealists, began to inspire the emergence of abstract expressionism.
Ernst established a growing reputation, and a critical following in 3 different countries. These countries being Germany, France, and the U.S. in the span of his whole career. So he's a very well-known and established artist. Okay, so Ernst's arrival in New York during World War II in 1941, along with other European avant-garde painters like Duchamp, electrified a generation of American artists. It really inspired them and influenced many young artists and their styles. The rejection of traditional painting in favor of one's own unique techniques really captivated many young American painters.
So Max Ernst, he had, a lot of paintings over his whole career, but just a few of his most famous works were Celebs,
We think.
and then Dadaville, and then also Pietà, which is or Revolution by Night.
Okay, so now we're going to go into the analysis of some of Max Ernst's major works, and we're going to do this for the next 3 artists that we're going to be doing later. And first we'll give you our initial perception and analysis of the paintings that we give you, and then we will give you the actual analysis to give you more insight on the works that we show you for each artist. Okay, so this painting is by Max Ernst. It's called Celebs, or
The elephant
Celebs.
of Celebs or Celebs.
Yeah. Pronunciation is a problem in this video. And to us, it's, I don't know, all I see is an elephant.
Yeah, it definitely looks like an elephant, but I don't know if like this like coil thing, I don't know what to call
If
that.
it's a trunk or something.
Yeah.
It looks sort of like
It looks
a
like
mix
trunk.
between an elephant and some kind of machine, because
Yeah,
it looks kind of geometric if you look at its body.
It definitely looks like metallic in some way. Like it looks like it's made out of like metal, to me at least.
And also like the top of like the elephant kind of looks like a helmet, maybe like in like a war or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's really dark too. Like there's
You see the background is very gray.
It's like something that's falling out of the sky.
Yeah, it looks like something's falling out of the sky in the top
And I
right corner.
think it kind of looks like there's airplanes in the sky. I'm not sure what like those things are on top of the elephant, or what seems to be like an elephant. And there is a naked lady with no head.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like a Barbie doll without a head. For some reason, that's what I see, like some kind of like mannequin body.
Yeah.
So there's definitely things that do not relate with each other. I think
That's what
just
makes it
Ernst,
surreal.
Ernst just put it all together to make a collage. Yeah. So for this painting, the themes of dream and night are widely present in Celebes, and the painting shows a strange dreamscape dominated by a large monster, half elephant, half machine, whatever you want to call it. It has a long curling trunk that culminates in a horned head shaped like a woman's chest, and there's also two other tusks that protrude from its left side, probably suggesting a second head or perhaps a tail. So this painting exudes a threatening atmosphere, a really a frightening, very scary tone, and this is linked to Ernst's traumatic experience at the German front line in the First World War. And as we talked about earlier, he served as a soldier in both World Wars. So there's a lot of experiences and traumatic events that really influence his artwork and his style. So on top of the elephant's body is a mechanical contraption with a single eye emerging eerily, kind of looking like a periscope. Other holes or eyes are visible throughout the painting, and this implied a preoccupation with sight and sightlessness, which in the Surrealist view was related to the inner sight of the unconscious mind. The twilight setting also suggests the transition between day and night, basically the waking world and dream, when ordinary objects begin to be transformed in the unconscious. And also, as you can see in the foreground, is a headless woman or mannequin, and this sort of beckons to the elephant as if calling him further into the world of fantasy. The cutout shapes and disjointed imagery clearly relate to Ernst's use of collage from 1919 and onwards, but the translation of this technique into painting was really inspired by the metaphysical landscapes of Giorgio de Chirico, an Italian painter. Ernst began to imitate a lot of Chirico's illogical juxtaposition of objects and his eerie, enigmatic settings, and we see that this is present within Celebes, with all of the unrelated objects, and just like the ominous and frightening tone that he portrays in this piece. So this painting was meant to show the fear and irrationality in one's mind during war, and the irrationality of the war itself. Ernst, having served in World War I, was deeply affected by it, and this gave him more insight as to the mind of one while he was at war. So while the elephant was interpreted to represent the fear inducing British tanks being seen for the first time, the headless woman that's in the painting likely represents Ernst's sister, whose death traumatized him, and in reality, a tank and Ernst's dead sister would never appear side by side in his life. But inside Ernst's mind during the war, these thoughts were mixed together with the rationality of reality separating them. So overall, the Elephant Celebes is an excellent depiction of Ernst with his unconscious mind, one that was very disturbed, because of the World War. So on to our second painting. This painting is called The Fireside Angel.
If you look at this painting, it's actually kind of creepy.
It really is creepy.
The creature, which is depicted here, is actually, it's really creepy.
Sort of a Birdman creature, which we learned is called a Lop Lop.
So I don't know, kind of looks like there's like a second figure coming out of his leg at the bottom there.
I see that.
Kind of looks like he's dancing in some way,
Yeah.
celebrating something.
I think it's like a
Yeah.
contradiction, because the creature is like really like menacing and ugly, but his, like, if you look at his eyes, it's kind of like a happy, like squinting.
Oh, it does look.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it does look like that.
And the background is like cheerful.
And I'm kind of confused about like the clothing it's wearing.
Yeah, it's very colorful.
Yeah.
Very colorful. Okay, so now for the real analysis. The Fireside Angel is depicting a fiery monster that represents a wave of fascism that overtook Europe in the mid-20th century. Ernst saw Surrealism as a means of transcendence from the horrors of war. Among the most common are forests and doves and a fantasy bird-like creature, which we see in this painting. And this bird-like creature is actually called Lop Lop. It sounds funny, but Ernst often depicted himself as a dove, or would use a Lop Lop as a form of narration and self-commentary. So going back to fascism, this painting is one of the few in Ernst's career that were actually inspired from political events. Ernst painted Fireside Angel shortly after the defeat of the Spanish Republicans in the Spanish Civil War. And in this conflict, Spanish fascist leaders were supported by Germany and Italy in their victory. So Ernst's goal was to depict the chaos that he saw spreading all over Europe, and the ruin and destruction that fascism brought to countries. So it seems kind of contradictory that Ernst used a title like Fireside Angel, something very positive, even though this is actually a picture about something very destructive, very, very scary and frightening. But Ernst actually uses the title on this painting to aid in evoking a sense of chaos and destruction. The use of the word angel, confuses an observer at first due to the abstract and grotesque figure that is the painting's subject. But Ernst forces the viewer's mind to think of these elements in a biblical sense. Ernst draws his audience to imagine the angel in the painting as if it were the angel of death from the 7 plagues, or a beast unleashed at the end of days. It appears that Ernst is even provoking his audience to question their own beliefs, by calling such a figure an angel. So it's very contradictory. This defies to how angels are traditionally portrayed, because when we hear the word angel, we generally think about something very beautiful and majestic and peaceful. But the angel that is depicted in his work is in contrast to the monster that Ernst created. So basically, the use of this title was a direct ploy to intrigue and engage his audience with his work. So the angel doesn't feature a single main color in its depiction, but instead Ernst uses colors from across the entire spectrum. The use of oil to paint the picture hides the brushstrokes, which gives the figure a more fluid look. And he also incorporates a mix of faded and defined lines to obscure the image in some areas, which causes the viewer to observe the painting more carefully in those places. The use of shading and diagonal lines helps to portray the idea of this giant moving clumsily and rapidly across a proverbial European wasteland, and also the lack of uniformity creates a feeling of chaos that strongly impacts the viewer. Ernst's use of dark color for the spawning figure portrays the cruelty and the darkness that was inherent in the governments, such as the Nazi Party, and we all know how evil they were. Ernst's fear of fascist governments is portrayed in this image, and this was portrayed by the newly forming angel from the pre-existing figure, that like blob that you see coming from the angel's leg. Ernst actually predicted the chaos and destruction that would be caused by World War II in Fireside Angel. He saw what could happen if fascist governments were allowed to spread and not being controlled by other more liberal powers. So when reflecting back on this painting, Max Ernst could not believe that what he depicted about the outcome of Europe after the Spanish Civil War had actually become true. Max Ernst portrayed his cautionary tale in a way that was characteristic of Surrealism, yet it was practical enough and simple enough for the ordinary man and the regular viewer to get the thoughts behind his artwork. So overall, Ernst painted this piece as a statement, basically explaining how the corruption and the evil fascist governments in Europe and in the world would spread, and it would only make the world worse. And it's really eerie, and it's really eerie to think that his depiction and his prediction in this painting actually became true with the outbreak of the Second World War. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and get into our second artist. Our second artist is Juan Miró. Juan Miró was a Spanish painter, a sculptor, and a ceramist. He was originally from Barcelona, Spain, but he moved to Paris at an early age, and there in Paris, France, that's where he began to develop in an unconventional style of work. He was very much against the established painting methods of the time, and he is often credited with being the founder of automatic drawing.
Miró became famous in the community as a surrealist because of his love for automatism and the use of sexual symbols in much of his work. Okay, so now that we're talking about Miró, we're going to talk about some of his works and maybe do like an analysis of some of his paintings. And so the first one we're going to go over is the Tilled Field. And there it is. And I guess we'll just get started. Jason?
Okay, so at first glance, you can see there's a lot of use of lines. I see there's a lot going on. There's a lot of color, a lot of light and like contrasting colors. Looks like there's an ear coming out of the tree. I don't know, maybe that means the earth is listening. I don't know.
And I noticed that like I've seen other like Miró's other work, and his is more abstract, and this is definitely not like realistic or anything, but this one seems to have more like value than other work that Miró has. Like some of his paintings have they're just basic shapes and solid colors, but this one he has a lot of blending and different values, and that's why I noticed this one's a little different.
There's definitely a lot of symbolism in this image, and hopefully we'll find out more about that later. Overall, I think that it's a pretty good painting. I don't know if I would hang this up on my wall, but
it's definitely not one of his normal paintings, I'd say.
Yeah, so the Tilled Field he started painting it during the summer of 1923, and he painted it as a view of his family farm, which was in Montreuil, Catalonia, if that's how you pronounce it. And it kind of relates in a way to some of his earlier paintings, but
really?
But it's his first example of his surrealist vision, and it's fanciful juxtapose of human, animal, and vegetal forms.
Okay, I see that.
Yeah. And its array of don't know how to say this word. Schematized creatures. It constitutes like a realm that you can only see through your mind, like in your imagination.
Oh yeah.
And
So all of this is going in his mind. Is it his mind?
All of it is just coming out of his mind,
Mhm.
and it's like a made-up version of his family's farm.
Yeah, it's his mind's perception of
Yeah.
what he saw. Okay. I see.
Okay.
Yeah, I noticed that people classify Miro as a surrealist artist, but a lot of people think that he's like borderline abstractionism, and I saw his work as more abstract, but this painting definitely demonstrates his use of surrealism.
And that's pretty much what the basis of surrealism is
Painting how you
painting
perceive things through
what's
your
in
subconscious.
your subconscious, what's in your head.
Hey.
And I think Miro did a good job of that.
And going back to that, he said while he was working on the painting, he wrote, "I have managed to escape into the absolute of nature." So he just escaped. His mind just escaped into the farm and what he saw, and he just painted it how he imagined it, just thinking about it.
And that kind of explains automatism. I'm not sure if that's what he was trying to go for, but automatism is all about just write what you think and just putting it right on the canvas.
So this painting is like a poetic metaphor that expresses his idyllic view and conception of his homeland. And he said about his homeland, he could not conceive of the wrongdoings of mankind. So the complex symbolism of the tilled field has a lot of sources, which attests to Miro's long-standing interest in his artistic heritage. So where he came from in his art, in his beginning, he just kept growing and like painting different things and just and then the muted contrasting tones of the painting, they somewhat recall the colors of where he came from, like his culture and his country. And then if you look at the painting, it somewhat seems like it's not going back into the landscape, it seems like it's going up.
It's very 2D, it's not.
Yeah, it's very
depth.
2D.
There's no depth to the painting.
And so in the painting, you can see how there's a lot of decorative, like
colorful
animals, multicolored animals, and they most likely were inspired by medieval Spanish tapestries. All of these creatures that you can see in the painting, once again, are derived from Catalan ceramics, which are kind of like where Miro came from. Because he collected them in his studio and he saw them every day, so they were in his mind, so could be why they came out in his painting. So in the middle right of the painting, just next to the tree, the animal that looks like an ox or a bull, that has its source in the prehistoric cave paintings of Altamira, which Miro knew very well. Even the enormous eye that is peering through the foliage of the pine tree, and the
kind of looks like a pine tree.
Yeah, kind of looks like a pine tree. And then the eye-covered pine cone beneath it, if you can find that, it's a little iffy. But these can be traced to examples of early Christian art in which the wings of angels were covered in many tiny eyes. And also, Miro found something special and like alive and magical in all things, which the gigantic ear, which is connected to the tree,
left side of the tree,
it, for example, reflects his belief that every object contains a living soul. Also, in this painting, The Tilled Field, there's some political content. So if you see in kind of the upper left corner, I don't know how to describe that, but if you see the birds, look down to the right, and there are 3 flags, which are the French, Catalan, and the Spanish, and this is referring to Catalonia's attempt to secede from the Spanish government. And By depicting the Catalan and French flags on the opposite side of the Spanish flag, Miro was announcing his allegiance to the Catalan cause.
Okay, so now that we analyze one of the pieces of Miro, you kind of get an idea of like the heritage and the places that Miro grew up in just in one painting. Okay, so now that we went over the analysis of the tilled field, we'll go into another work by Miro called The Birth of the World.
Okay, so at first glance, The Birth of the World by Miro looks pretty ominous.
Looks really sad.
Yeah, with a lot of like dark shades. The only like light colors that he has is the balloon, like the.
It looks like a balloon, yeah.
With the yellow string and the blue. I mean, the red circle.
To me, it kind of makes me think about like when he says "birth of the world," it makes me think about how like I don't know if depending on if you're religious or not, we learn about how the world started from nothing, and it kind of looks like this, how it's like just dark and gray, but then something, whether it be the Big Bang Theory or God creating the world, it's kind of looks like the red dot is like the little something that the world came out of. I noticed in this painting though, he did use the normal shapes that I've seen in other works, because the tilled field is, like I said, it was a lot different than his other works, and this one seems more typical for Miro.
The Birth of the World, which is this painting, was painted in 1925, and in this painting, Miro places totally abstract geometric forms on a picture surface that has been stained and scarred as though like it has been attacked and like beaten and torn apart in some way, which is weird, but you know. Surrealism, that's what it is. But his real struggle in these years, which is depicted by this painting, was he wanted to detach his subject from the ground it was painted on. So he kind of wanted to detach his paintings from the surface canvas.
Oh, I can see.
Yeah, and he wanted to do this to allow these abstract forms to float free of the canvas's gravitational pull. If you understand what I'm saying. About this painting, Miro said that it depicts a sort of genesis, so a kind of beginning of life. And to make this work, Miro poured, brushed, and flung paint unevenly on a printed canvas, which I said he'd already kind of beaten up and torn up in some way, and so that the paint soaked in some areas and rested on top in others. And atop this uncontrolled application of paint, he added lines and shapes he'd previously planned for the painting in his studies, like thinking about the painting, what he was going to do. And then the bird or kite that you see is, or shooting star, or whatever you see, the balloon, and the figure with the white head, it may seem somehow familiar to each other, but their association is illogical. There's no reason behind it or anything. It's just, he just put it there. And then, when he was describing his method for this painting, he said, "Rather than setting out to paint something, I began painting, and as I paint the picture, it begins to assert itself, or suggest itself under my brush. The first stage is free, unconscious."
So, in conclusion, The Birth of the World and The Tilled Field are two of Juan Miro's most well-known pieces. So now we're going to go ahead and get started on René Magritte. He was born in the provincial town of Lessines in Belgium. He moved to Brussels in 1916 and he studied at the Académie des Beaux-Arts. And during the 1920s, he experimented with different avant-garde styles such as Cubism and Orphism. So while some French Surrealists led pretty extravagant lives, Magritte preferred the quiet middle-class existence, a life symbolized by the many bowler-hatted men in many of his works. In 1927, Magritte moved to Paris to join the Surrealists.
There are many things in René Magritte's past that kind of influenced his work during the Surrealist movement, but when he was younger, he was really fascinated with magicians, so I guess that kind of made him fascinated with illusions, which he plays with illusions a lot in his artwork. And when he was younger, his mom died in 1912 when he was about 14.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, why am I laughing? And the feelings that he got about her death made way into its paintings, like this painting called Rape, and it's we'll put it up. You'll be able to see it.
Alright, are you guys ready for this?
So, repetition was an important strategy for Magritte. He had an ability to present figures in a suggestive yet questioning manner. He had playful and provocative sense of humor, which worked into many of his pieces. To support himself, Magritte spent many years as a commercial artist, producing advertisements and book designs, and this initial work, this most likely helped him to shape his art.
A lot of Magritte's work showed up on postage stamps too, so it kind of gives you an idea of how known his art was.
Some of Magritte's most famous works employ both words and images. His works seem to declare that they have no mystery, yet, looking at them, they are marvelously strange. The illustrative quality of Magritte's pieces often result in a powerful paradox. Images that are beautiful in their clarity and simplicity, but they also provoke unsettling thoughts. Magritte also put his own surrealist twist on other people's famous paintings, and his work depicted similar and recurring themes. Some of his favorite themes were floating rocks, paintings within a painting, and he used many inanimate objects within a human figure.
You'll see a lot of like apples in his work and bowler hats, and you'll notice that in a lot of his work.
Yeah, you'll notice in a lot of his works that it features a lot of things that may seem random and don't belong, but he always finds a way to make everything connect. Magritte took everyday normal objects and simply rearranged them. He rearranged the figures and locations.
And his art raised a lot of serious questions about the relationship between painting and reality. Like, we'll show you his painting Treachery of Images, and on the bottom it says in French, this is not a pipe. And you look at the painting, you're like, well, of course it's a pipe, it's there. But really, he tries to show the viewer that it's a painting of a pipe and it's not an actual pipe. And stuff like that kind of like plays with your brain. And that was René Magritte's goal.
He often painted metamorphoses.
Metamorphoses?
Metamorphic, I don't know. And he played with forms and colors that created visual illusions. And he was also famous for working in two types of surrealism, which were visual and conceptual.
Okay, so now we're going to go into the analysis of René Magritte's work. And fun fact about him, he painted every day for 40 years, so naturally he had a lot of paintings and a lot of works.
What?
I know, I can't even imagine, like, I have to do the math to see how much that is. Yeah.
He must have strong hands.
But, so I'm going to analyze about 2 or 3 of his 1,000 works. Yes, we will. I apologize. But yes, 40 years every day. That is a committed artist.
That's correct.
Yes. Okay, so this painting is called The Son of Man by René Magritte. And to me, this painting is the epitome of René Magritte's work because it has 2 themes that occur a lot in his paintings, and the first would be the apple. And the apple, you see like a green apple show up in a lot of his work, and a lot of common objects show up in his work. And the second theme is putting more normal objects in weird, unusual context, like just how this apple is levitating. Obviously, this isn't realistic. An apple can't just float like that. And also another theme, a third theme that I noticed was this apple that's covering this man's face. And a lot of people say that this is a self-portrait, but you can't really tell because the apple is covering the man's face. But this covering of this face occurs in a lot of his work. And the next painting that we're going to be analyzing is called The Lovers, and you'll see that you can't see their faces either. There was a quote that Rene Magritte once said about this painting. He said, "At least it hides the face partly. So you have the apparent face, the apple, hiding the visible but hidden, the face of the person. It's something that happens constantly. Everything we see hides another thing. We always want to see what is hidden by what we see. There is an interest in that which is hidden in which the visible does not show us. This interest can take the form of a quite intense feeling, a sort of conflict, one might say, between the visible that is hidden and the visible that is present." Okay, so overall, The Son of Man depicts three main themes that I just talked about, and this painting and the quote that I just told you guys kind of shows Rene Magritte's take on how humans constantly have the urge to see what is hidden. And these hidden objects, like I said, occur in a lot of his paintings, and speaking of which, we're going to go into The Lovers, and you'll see why they're related.
As Sydney said, this painting by Rene Magritte is called The Lovers, and just by the looks of it, it looks kind of like, I don't know, eerie and weird, just because like two people's faces are completely covered up.
It's almost like he painted a scene from like a scary movie or something like that. Something very awkward and weird. I'm kind of curious as to what their faces are like on the inside of what looks to be like a blanket or like a cover of some sort. And I'm also wondering why they're outside.
I'm just wondering why their faces are covered in the first place. Like,
to me, it's really interesting because you see, it looks like they're just taking a casual picture as if they don't know that their faces are cloaked.
Actually,
you know.
So it's like they're acting like there's nothing there when there is something blocking their faces.
And it seems like almost there's some kind of like, since they're acting like nothing's there, it kind of seems like maybe there's like another species out there that like is used to this kind of covering. I don't know.
But the way that his body is like, and his face is like pressed up against her cheek, like it shows like that
some kind of affection.
Yeah, some affection, like they're passionate about each other, but they're not letting like the cover get in the way of their true love or something like that.
Okay, so now for the real analysis. Rene Magritte, when he was younger, he was really interested in the Phantomist films. It was about a shadowy hero, and it was a thriller series in which a man never revealed his identity. The main character in these Phantomist films always had some kind of shroud or stocking over his head. So another source of the shrouded faces is when we talked about how Rene Magritte's mother committed suicide in a river, and when he saw her body, her nightgown was covering her face, so that image always stuck with him, and that made its way into his work, and that kind of explains why he has a line of paintings where their faces are covered. And also, as we said, it seems like the couple they're just taking a normal picture, and what this picture seems so casual, but then the only thing that makes it so surreal and unusual is because their faces are covered, and it kind of shows a source of alienation or suffocation and death that he was feeling about his mother's death.
Well, basically what Magritte wanted to do was he wished to cultivate an approach that avoided the stylistic distractions of most modern paintings. He believed, overall, that we need to not look for the mysterious, because it lurks everywhere in even the most conventional lives. So, like what he wanted his point to get across was that even you can find mysterious things even in normal everyday lives.
Magritte's work had a major impact on a number of movements, including the pop, conceptualism, and a number of the 1980s. A painting of the 1980s.
Paintings of the 1980s. So, after a fallout with fellow artist Andre Breton, Magritte moved back to Brussels, where he stayed for the remainder of his life.
And later he started to work on sculptures, and I apologize for the dinging in the background.
So that's Renee Magritte,
Renee
everybody.
Magritte, yo! Okay, so now we're going to talk about Salvador Dali, and I'm sure you've all heard this name before, because he's one of the most well-known Surrealist artists. And in 1929, that's when Dali joined the Surrealist movement, and he became the most controversial member, and you'll find out why later. And he was a sculptor, painter, and a photographer, and he painted strong imagery of the realm of dreams. Also, what was so remarkable about Dali was that his first works were exhibited when he was just 14 years old.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
So, in many of Dali's works, he uses complex obsessive symbolism deriving from both his childhood memories and psychoanalytic writing.
So Dali moved to Madrid in 1922 after the death of his mom to devote more time to art. There he attended a prominent art academy in Madrid, and from his earliest years as an artist he exhibited his work widely, lectured, and wrote. Although Dali was friendly with Picasso, as he was a great influence to him, he was never an imitator, and he always sought to incorporate cutting-edge, avant-garde
Wow.
styles in his work.
Dali's eccentric manners was a reflection of his art and vice versa in polarized opinions. Also, Salvador Dali constantly depicts the landscape of his homeland, one that became synonymous with the landscape of the imagination and of dreams.
Woo! We are going to talk about specific works of Salvador Dali, and one of his muses that will play a part in the paintings that we're going to talk about was his wife Gala. She was one of his muses.
Okay, so this painting by Dali is called The Face of War, and so from the looks of it, it's really scary and very ominous looking, very dark.
When I think of Face of War, I think of a lot of scared, horrified faces, because a lot of people, obviously, the war isn't a good thing, and all these faces, even though it's like faceception, but whenever I look at these faces, like they look horrified, and that I think maybe that's sort of the story behind the name of the title or the name of the painting.
And around the biggest face seems to be like snakes,
like leeches or something.
Yeah, like snakes like hovering around, and the faces really display a lot of fear, anxiety, and like disgust, and just nothing positive is. I don't see anything positive out of this, except for maybe like the blue little background. I don't know, I'm not sure, but
oh yeah, and we did talk about how Surrealists were against World War I, and how Dadaism and Surrealism kind of founded around the opposition of war, and this face of war, obviously Salvador Dali doesn't have a positive take on war, and so I guess that kind of shows the surrealist feelings about war.
So, the face of war was painted in 1940 during the brief period of time that Salvador Dali lived in the state of California. And the period in which the painting was made was very, distraught. It was very, it was a bad time for most of the world, especially for Spaniards, which Salvador Dali was. It was bad because the 3-year-long Second Spanish Civil War had pretty much just ended, and it dashed the hopes of the fledgling republic, which turned into a repressive dictatorship. And then World War II began pretty much around the same time, giving the entire globe an appearance of war. And this painting represents Dali's feelings of war, which he felt was just endlessly repeating death and decay. So if you look at the painting, the miserable face of the corpse sees death, speaks death, and reflected in his eyes are the corpses whose eyes and mouths are also filled with death. And Dali, just in the lower right corner, Dali suggested and claimed that that handprint depicted there was his own. And then, so war was a especially special topic for Dali because he claimed he could have premonitions of war, and in fact that he felt the pain and destruction of bombings, which had not occurred yet. And then just one last point about this painting is that even if you are viewing this painting for the first time, which many of you probably are, it is clearly seen that suffering is illustrated through everything in this painting. All that meant from this painting is that war is death, and that's pretty much how Dali felt.
Okay, so this next painting that we're going to analyze is The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali. And I guess this one is definitely surreal, and this is one of his most famous works.
This is one of Surrealism's most famous works.
Yeah, this is basically shows when you think of Surrealism, you've got to think about this painting, because I feel like everyone has seen one version of this painting or another. And here, this kind of makes me refer back to Rene Magritte's work, because he took normal objects and put them in an unusual context. And here, Salvador Dali took the clocks and showed them melting, so it kind of shows them dreamlike. It's kind of a dreamlike state.
Yeah, I guess in this painting, time sort of doesn't apply. Time doesn't exist in this painting.
Sort of disintegrating.
And it really shows like a dreamlike sort of landscape, something that you would never see in the real world, something that's you would think of just in your subconscious, what's going on in your mind.
Yeah, it seems very empty, like you do in dreams. There's not much space that fills up when you have dreams. And I'm really curious about the little weird thing right in the middle of the painting. It looks like
at first I thought maybe. It was like a pig. I'm not exactly sure, but this painting is pretty much the essence of what Surrealism is.
The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali was painted in 1931, and the meaning behind this piece of art is definitely, in a way, not easy to grasp, but there's a lot to it. So, there are 4 clocks on display in this painting, and they're pretty much the only thing in otherwise an empty desert scene. And this might seem uncanny and not normal, and the clocks are not flat, as you might think at your first look at it. But they are bent out of shape, appearing to be melting. So there are many different ways you can interpret this painting. One way is that it depicts a dream state. And if it does depict a dream state, then the melting and distorted clocks symbolize the erratic and weird, crazy passage of time that we experience while dreaming. If we interpret this painting like a dream state, like I said, then it seems like the clocks, they are melting because they don't have any power in the dream. Because dreams, you don't keep time in dreams. It's just you're dreaming. So that's one way to interpret the painting. There's another way to interpret it, and some art scholars believe that this is what Dali was symbolizing, is Albert Einstein's groundbreaking theory of relativity, which was a new and revolutionary idea back in the culture of the 1930s. And through the theory of relativity, Albert Einstein proposed a new concept of time as being relative and complex, not something fixed and easily tracked with a gadget like a pocket watch. And in this painting, Salvador Dali shows the clocks melting away and thus losing their power and stability over the world around them. And through his melting clocks, Dali might be saying that simple machines like wall clocks and pocket watches are primitive, old-fashioned, and even unimportant in a post-Einstein world. As we've talked about many times already, the dream state is very important in Surrealism. But also, jokes, humor, sarcasm, and wordplay are also central ideas to Surrealism art, or Surrealist art. And in the Persistence of Memory, Salvador Dali uses sarcasm in the title of this painting, and which is Persistence of Memory, which I've already said a few times that the clocks are losing their power in this dream world. They are literally melting away and seem anything but persistent in Dali's depiction. Also, the ants eating away the face of the red clock, which is in the lower left corner, also symbolizes the decaying and therefore unimportant nature of our arbitrary way of keeping time. One last way that you can interpret and see this painting is that the desolate landscape where the clocks are is also barren and infertile. There's nothing there, it's just a desert. And some art scholars notice the resemblance that this landscape and other Salvador Dali landscapes which he have painted are somewhat similar to his beachfront hometown of Port-Legat. Not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but so this means from that you get that this could just be a memory from Salvador Dali's childhood or from his past of his hometown, just with like the clocks melting. And from this painting, there are different things that seem like you've never seen them before. Like they're just out there, crazy ideas, but they're kind of based off of things you could see in your everyday life. Like one watch hangs on a tree branch like wet laundry to dry it. And then the branch is not flowering or covered in leaves, but is sapped and dried out, which shows how desolate and just not nice this landscape is. Dali painted this at an age of around 27 years old. So if we're looking for the biographical meaning of this, which is meaning like from his past, what he remembers, the clocks might be representative of his adolescence and are fading or melting away because Dali cannot remember them accurately now that so much time has passed since his childhood. While we can never know for certain the true meaning, interpretation, or analysis that Dali himself actually intended for his painting, it's most likely that all of these ideas that I just talked about were combined to create this painting.
So in conclusion, Dali and his works really made a big impact on the Surrealist community. His depiction of the subconscious mind and dreamlike thoughts really grasped the essence of what Surrealism was all about.
So, from the very beginning, emerging from the carnage of the First World War, Surrealism demonstrated a rigorous faith in the possibility of changing life and pursued this end with unswerving determination. The backbone of the movement was the members' unshakable idealism, providing a framework that could encompass many diverse styles, interests, and personalities. So, the organized Surrealist movement in Europe dissolved in the onset of World War II, and some people see Surrealism as the most influential movement in the 20th century. And even though Surrealism was most prominent in literature and visual arts, it lightly affected theater, dance, and music.
Figures like Dali and Man Ray brought the style to a huge popular audience through fashion, photography, advertising, and film.
Surrealist painters such as Miro would be an important influence on the abstract expressionism in the late 1940s.
The surprising imagery, deep symbolism, refined painting techniques, and disdain for convention influenced later generations of artists. Pop culture and art world were extremely influenced by Magritte's unique ability to take something so ordinary, yet make viewers see something completely different.
Surrealism was a major alternative to the Cubist movement, and also it was largely responsible for perpetuating the modern painting and the traditional emphasis on content.
The post-war years saw many attempts to resuscitate Surrealist activities, but the group struggled to find a sense of unity and purpose. There was an insurmountable gulf of time between the new young adherents and the veteran members of the group, and while the Paris-based Surrealists grouped around Breton still emphasized the political motivation of the movement, for many others, Surrealism had taken on new meanings. Surrealist politics and poetics had diverged, and new artistic currents inevitably took over. So like all other movements, Surrealism eventually died out.
Most artistic movements eventually burn themselves out, but it is a testament to the enduring spirit of Surrealism that it has not only lasted as an official movement for over 40 years, but is also still an important influence on art today.
Woo! What?